Chinese influence is expanding.
Using hyper-surveillance technology.
1 million people in camps now.
Russia has amassed tens of thousands of troops.
Explosions rock the southern.
The refugee crisis is getting worse by the day.
We can only stop the endless suffering if the world recognizes the harm that dictatorships are doing.
Many of the rights we take for granted in the democratic world are a daily struggle.
Wars, illegal detentions, authoritarian regimes, imprisonment of activists, really horrible things happening to people.
Civil society leaders, journalists, and artists often face violence and repression because of their work.
Corruption, tyranny, abuse of power do not go on a break.
Since 2005, we have worked to expose abuses of power by tyrannical regimes around the world. We have created a network through which dissidents learn from each other and grow, so that, together, we can challenge tyranny.
We believe that the only way to rise against tyranny is through a united global movement.
The fact that a shocking 72% of the world's population lives under some form of authoritarian regime makes our mission more important than ever.
By supporting and bringing together activists from all around the world who are standing up to authoritarianism, exposing dictators and their corrupt regimes, and creating innovative solutions to strengthen democracy, we will succeed.
What really makes us special and successful are the creative ways in which, even as a small team, we manage to combat authoritarianism. We have over a dozen programs that use targeted advocacy work and bold, innovative campaigns to raise awareness. One of these is our award-winning Wear Your Values program, which focuses on the intersection of fashion and human rights. Wear Your Values advocates for transparency in global supply chains and aims to hold the fashion industry accountable for its complicity in human rights abuses worldwide.
Most of the programs that support activists take them out of their environments and their movements. What the Freedom Fellowship does is supply them with digital security, fundraising, media, nonviolent movement building in a way that doesn't disrupt their work but actually adds to what they are doing.
HRF started its impact litigation program in 2016 to provide pro bono international legal representation. We pursue cases before a quasi-judicial mechanism within the United Nations system called the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention.
By the time the Human Rights Foundation picked up on my arrest and my detentions, I was facing 2 charges of treason, which meant 40 years in prison.
We're proud to say that every opinion we've received from the working group has been in our clients' favor. And there's just no greater privilege than to bear witness to that.
Suddenly, I went from not having a chance to having the opportunity to be heard.
Only together we are stronger. There are many troublemakers like me, and I feel I am among my family.
It's a global network of support for human rights defenders around the world.
They know the importance of people's voices, and they shed light on people's stories and make people feel like they're heard.
We celebrate powerful stories that spark actions.
You play an important role in our democracy movement.
We need to assume that the fight for freedom in each one of our countries is a fight for freedom in all of our countries.
The people that we bring here are some of the most powerful voices. Consider yourselves part of this community, because what this is ultimately is a community, and for a lot of these people, this is like their family.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you to the 2025 College Freedom Forum, hosted by the Human Rights Foundation in partnership with the Initiative for Global Leadership here at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. HRF is very excited to be hosting the second day of this conference because the theme of this year, Democracy on the Brink, is so central to our mission statement. As you just saw, HRF was founded to protect and promote human rights in countries ruled by authoritarian regimes. Today, that's 72% of the global population, nearly 5 billion people. As you can see, HRF works on promoting these rights in authoritarian regimes. We've seen since our founding back in 2005 this global surge of authoritarianism. These regimes work together, they learn from one another, and they legitimize each other on the global stage. Authoritarian regimes commit some of the world's most egregious human rights violations. Everything from rigged elections, to bans on free speech, to violent crackdowns on peaceful protesters, to the arbitrary detention, torture, and disappearance of dissidents. In democracies, flawed as they may be, there are systems of checks and balances in place to ensure that no one person has too much power. But in authoritarian regimes, that's simply not the case. A single tweet can get you detained. Protesting against the government could land you years in prison or endanger your loved ones. Those confronting authoritarianism put everything on the line, and they risk their lives simply to further human rights. We know that this line of work is a challenging but rewarding one. It demands cooperation between activists on the ground, but also policymakers, journalists, dissidents, industry leaders, technologists, and even students. For this reason, HRF founded the College Freedom Forum to bring critical conversations about democracy and human rights to university campuses across the world. Today, you will hear from some of the world's leading activists working in the most challenging contexts. Our first College Freedom Forum was actually back here at Tufts University in 2013. We hope that the talks today will provide you insight into strategies for defending democracy, connections for professional growth, and inspirations for your future endeavors. At HRF, we know that the impact students have on this world cannot be underestimated. Some of the most powerful activist movements in the world actually started from the courage and determination of university students to speak out against injustice and dare to envision a better future for themselves. In 2014, in Hong Kong, students poured out into the streets in unprecedented numbers to demand respect for civil liberties, igniting a revolution against the Chinese Communist Party. 2 years ago, in Iran, students led the now infamous Women Life Freedom protests, denouncing the regime's repressive policies toward women, even in the face of extreme police brutality and imprisonment. And even as I speak, in Serbia, in 50 college campuses, students have blockaded their universities to make their voices known against the regime's corruption and injustice, grinding the entire nation to a halt. They are leading the biggest protests in Serbia since the fall of the dictator Slobodan Milosevic in the year 2000, and they are not backing down. So today, I challenge each of you to stand in solidarity with these student protesters by committing to becoming an active participant in our program. Talk to one of our speakers, ask them a question, come to our breakout sessions in the afternoon and share some of your ideas for advancing democracy. Or talk with one of your peers today and commit to one action that you can take within your own circles to further human rights. These actions may feel small, but taken together, they have the capacity for creating real change. With that, I'm pleased to introduce Dayna Cunningham, the Pierre and Pamela Omidyar Dean of Tisch College.
Good morning and welcome. We are so excited to see all of you here for this incredibly timely and relevant program over the next few days. I did not know I was not going to have a podium, so I'm going to be doing a little two-hand shuffle here. I want to start by thanking a number of people who made this conference possible. So I'm going to read here. So first, of course, a huge thanks to Elle and to the HRF for bringing this conference here. And as Elle said, we've been partners since 2013. It is such a rich and important partnership for us. I want to thank Liz Shellbrand and Grace Spalding Fetcher, who is one of our own, for their tireless work on today's symposium. And I don't think Sherman Teichman is here yet. Is he? Oh, wait, he is. Huge shout out, and please applause. Many of you know Sherm is the founder of IGL, and nothing that we do here today as IGL would have been possible without Sherm's inspiration and genius in creating IGL. Also, of course, want to thank Heather Barry. Where are you, Heather? Heather, always quietly in the back doing all of the magic necessary to make things happen. And of course, Michaela Harrington, both of Tisch College. Michaela, wherever you are, I cannot see you, but. So I want to just say that right now in this country, we are reeling. We are reeling from the changes that this administration is bringing, and we have romanticized and idealized the strength of democracy and assumed that our institutions would prevail. And I think we are all in shock at the rate of disassembly that is happening right now. So we in this country have a lot to learn from you who are assembled here today. You are helping us remember and understand the preciousness, the frailty, the criticality of democratic institutions, reminding us to love them and cherish them and fight for them in ways that Americans honestly have not had to for a long time. American democracy is not perfect, obviously. We've had movements and struggles that have tried to make it better, but never in lived memory have we been so called to say that democracy is on the brink. So this forum is especially poignant and meaningful to us here. And of course, for all of us, the chance to be in a learning community, a community of solidarity, a community of mutual support that can help us learn how to continue the fight against authoritarianism, wherever it may rear up next. So I want to end by saying a couple things. One, this is critical to IGL's mission, not only to prepare leaders and citizens for a role in making this a more just world, but also doing that in part through building networks globally of activists and agents who are seeking to bring the change now that we want to see. Please, tomorrow, come back. Wait a minute. Tomorrow, Saturday, the third and final day of the symposium, we're going to explore issues such as justice and the rule of law, oligarchy, capitalism and democracy, and how to balance social and economic needs with democratic participation. Please come back tomorrow. It is so wonderful to see you all here, and now let us go forth and make good trouble. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for an amazing introduction, Dean Cunningham. I'm Chloe Yao, a tough student, a sophomore from Hong Kong studying international relations and environmental studies, and one of the organizing chairs for Democracy on the Brink. It is a privilege to introduce our speakers for session 1, 3 extraordinary global leaders whose lives and work embody resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of truth and justice. Our first speaker, a remarkable advocate for truth, freedom, and empowerment, is Faisal Al Mutar. Growing up in Iraq, Faisal experienced firsthand the horrors of extremism and authoritarianism. Surviving the Iraq War, the murder of his brother, and several kidnapping attempts, he refused to be silenced. Instead, he founded Ideas Beyond Borders, a nonprofit countering misinformation and ensuring access to knowledge in regions where it is most suppressed. His efforts have earned him global recognition, including the President's Volunteer Service Award from Barack Obama and the Beacon Award from the Ellis Island Honor Society. It is an honor to introduce a leader whose work continues to break barriers and challenge oppression. Through his unwavering commitment to truth and knowledge, he has empowered countless individuals in regions where information is most suppressed. His talk today will be on lessons from Iraq. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our first speaker, Faisal Al Mutar.
That was wonderful. Do I need this? Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much, Tufts University, for having me, and thank you to College of Freedom Forum and the amazing, wonderful people here from the Human Rights Foundation. My name is Faisal Al Mutar. I grew up in an academic family. I'm the last child, so I'm the youngest. We actually have a term in Iraqi, says the last grape, and the most loved person of the, so I got a lot of love from my mom growing up, so I don't need that much attention. I grew up in a family of 7, as I said. My dad is a doctor, my mom is a lawyer, 2 of my siblings are engineers, and 2 of them are doctors, and I'm the failure. So I would say that my life is defined to 3 main chapters. The first chapter of it is actually under the regime of this guy, which I think some of you are here young enough not to remember, but his name was Saddam Hussein, and you might actually have seen him in an episode of South Park where he's dating the Satan, but I've lived under the real Saddam Hussein, who was not dating Satan, but I guess he was Satan himself. What was that like in practice? I always say that there are 2 major things, I would say 2 memories of that regime as I was young growing up in it. First, 1 out of 4 adults were members of the intelligence services. So the intelligence services are called the mukhabarat. They're known for their brutal killing, mass detention, etc. So what that makes, so imagine if you have 1 person out of 4 adults in the intelligence services, you start becoming afraid of your own family. Because you're now thinking that, okay, if I say something here, my colleague in work will report me to the intelligence, my family. In fact, there were stories after the fall of the regime of people having divorces because they thought their main partner was part of the intelligence. So authoritarianism in Iraq under Saddam's regime was not just physical, which I'm sure many of you, if you do any research, you'll hear about the mass graves and the chemical weapons used against the Kurds and etc. But authoritarianism in Iraq was also mental, is that you start becoming afraid of your own soul. The other thing that I would like to mention, which is done a lot of research, is that in the 90s, when I was growing up, there were more books that are banned than read. He had an absolute control of the sources of information. We had 2 major channels, and if you're caught in sometimes having satellite channel or internet from the outside, you might end up in jail and sometimes afraid for the rest of your life. Then the second chapter of my life, when the United States came in, and that's where the Iraq War, and my memory of that was, so my dad being a doctor, we actually relocated to West Baghdad, and we grew up in a residential neighborhood. And my memory of that era was we turned from a neighborhood that kids used to play soccer, I guess Americans, yeah, we call it football, but you guys call it soccer, in the streets, into absolute chaos, and in which dead bodies became the norm, kidnapping and killing became everyday scenery. So what happened? So that's what the title of my talk is, the lessons of the war. And now, of course, I'm talking about things in hindsight. I mean, I always forget that the war actually happened almost 22 years ago. So now, as I'm in my middle 30s, actually, I've lived more years after the war than before. So this is like a lesson from somebody who actually lived pretty much all of it, and I'm still a regular visitor to Iraq. I have, in fact, 2 offices of my organization, Ideas Beyond Borders, over there, so I'm still very actively involved in the country. And I would say the first lesson is that you cannot bomb democracy into countries. That is the first important lesson, I guess, we're now learning in hindsight, is that you cannot just bomb it. And most importantly, especially in a country that never have any history of democracy. So I'm going to give you a brief history version of Iraq. Iraq as a civilization has existed for thousands of years. I'm sure you've heard of Babylon and Assyria and Acadia and all of that stuff, the Ottoman Empire. But really as a nation, it only existed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. What we now know of as Iraq with its borders and was actually established after the British and the French divided the Middle East and what's what and what's Syria and what's Iraq and stuff like that. So as a nation, what we think of as Iraq is only been 100 years old. And it started with a king, whose name is King Faisal, who was named after. And the king was killed by the communists. So his son was beheaded by the communists. And then the socialists killed the communists. And then Saddam Hussein was killed by the Americans. That is the history of Iraq 101. So from a political landscape, we've never had any history whatsoever of democracy, which is very different. You're going to hear from Felix, you're going to hear from people in Venezuela and other parts of Latin America, in which they had a grim of at least some idea of democracy before, and they transitioned to authoritarianism. We actually had the unique feature which we never had a democracy to begin with. The third lesson is that it's very hard to build a democracy when everybody around you is authoritarian. So one of the challenges that we still currently have in Iraq, and we had it from the beginning, is that when we were transitioning to what's now called democracy, is that the countries around us, from Iran to Syria to everybody else, wanted to make sure that we become a failed state, that's not going to trickle down into the rest of the region. Because if Iraq would become successful, then the people of these countries will demand dignity, and they will not change. And places like Iran, and we actually have a lot of historical connection to Iran because of our religious connection, they will see, okay, these are people who look like us, and they have democracy and freedom. How come we don't have it over here? So Iran made sure that Iraq becomes a failed state. And then as a result of the war, and there's a term that was established after World War II called denazification. So when the United States came into Germany, they took off the Nazis. In Iraq, we had depathification. So all of the people who were part of the former regime actually could not work anymore. So think about that. All of the people who actually have institutional knowledge, and now we're talking about institutions, are no longer able to work. So we actually had people who came after the war who have zero expertise and zero knowledge of how to manage a country whatsoever. They cannot even manage their own households, leave aside managing a country of 40 million people. So what happened was an entire destruction of the institutions. Leave aside the institutions of democracies, but the institution of the state itself. So what that led to? It led an entire fracture of the Iraqi identity, and one of our board members, Steven Pinker, who talks a lot about evolutionary psychology, is that we actually went to our own basic instincts, which is the tribal and sectarian identity. And that's why, so the moment that state, because the identity was actually attached to the state, and the moment that state was destroyed, there was no identity anymore. Everybody went back to their Sunni background, Shia background, Kurdish background, Arab background, because the concept of state was removed. And for me, democracy, so one of the lessons, again, of the Iraq War is that when George W. Bush made that famous speech of mission accomplished, number one, which obviously wasn't, and the other thing was that we now have democracy. But the picture of that democracy was just people voting. But democracy is not just about voting. It's not just about the elections or the illusion of an elections. It's about institutions. It's about the rule of law. And most importantly, and that's, I would say, most important lesson from Iraq, is the concept that other humans have as many rights as you do. And that is something that Iraq, when the state was dissolved, everybody went back. I remember my dad voted in the first elections in 2005, and everybody was voting purely on their sectarian lines. And that's why you see the democratic elections in Iraq, is that if the Shias are 60%, you have 60% Shias in the parliament, you have a much amount of Kurds that reflect the ethnic. So we don't have, so technically the democracy is just a version of either mob rule, which is the majority kills the minority or persecutes the minority, or people just voting to protect themselves from the other guys, right? It's like, I'm gonna vote for this party so this other group will not kill me. So growing up with all of that is, you had two choices. You either submit, which is like, there's a term in Iraqi which is called sha'layya ma'layya, which is, it's not, I have nothing to do with this, I cannot do anything, or do something. And that's what I started my organization, Ideas Beyond Borders, which has, as I said, active offices in Iraq, in both federal and the Kurdistan region. And knowing with all of kind of this context, the first thing we focused on is really making democratic knowledge available and accessible. Is that people cannot fight for democracy and any of these ideals, which I think gotta be shared at this event, if they don't know what this even mean. Right? When people talk about democracy, do they even know the definition? Do they even know the concepts of individual rights or the concept of freedom of speech? What does even freedom of speech even mean? So our first mandate was making this knowledge accessible. And to our surprise, and this was kind of like a spontaneous project, we grew from 0 subscribers to now 8.5 million subscribers, not just from Iraq, but all the way to Morocco and many people in that region, in fact, outside the Arab world as well, including in the Kurdistan region and in Afghanistan and Iran, which shows, first of all, that there is actually a demand for this, especially among the young generation who did not grow up with what I call the authoritarian mentality that I was talking about. Like my parents and the generation with them, my mom and dad at least grew in 5 wars in their lifetime. For us, we grew up only under 2, so we're actually in the good side of things. So the first thing was education, and the second thing was empowerment, which actually support the voices and not impose the voices, but support them. So this is one of the people that we have supported, and Al-Ansari, who is a very dear friend of mine, met in my last visit. He said that it's not just a war of weapons, but a war of words, ideas, and narratives. So I have 2 lessons for you guys. As some of you, I'm guessing, are studying international affairs and all of that. First is that when you try to change a country, think about, the first question is that, are we supporting the local voices, or are we trying to impose our own version of progress? Number 2, are we supporting to create self-sustaining institutions, or institutions that collapse the moment we withdraw? I mean, Iraq looks like a Switzerland compared to Afghanistan, in which we all saw the pictures of people falling from planes, and the entire institutions of Afghanistan fell apart the moment the US military fell. And then you have another picture, which is from the fall of Saigon. So this is not new that these institutions or democratization efforts have been attempted and failed. So my talk today is about these lessons, but most importantly, is that the Iraq catastrophe, is that it's a lesson of humility. And before we even start to interfere in any country, the first thing we have to do is to listen. Thank you so much. And if you are interested in our organization, Ideas Beyond Borders, you can join us, and you can see I'm approachable. You can talk to me anytime you want. Thank you so much, Oslo, College of Freedom Forum, and Tufts. Thank you.
Thank you for your powerful insights, Faisal. So our next speaker is Jewher Ilham, a dedicated Uyghur human rights advocate. In 2013, her life was changed forever when her father, Uyghur economist Ilham Tohti, was arrested at a Beijing airport as they prepared to travel to the US. He was later sentenced to life in prison for separatism. Since then, Jewher has become a powerful advocate for the Uyghur community, testifying before the US Congress, publishing op-eds for the New York Times and The Guardian, and receiving the Sakharov Prize on her father's behalf. An author, activist, and labor rights researcher, she remains at the forefront for the fight for justice, most recently through her book and documentary, All Static and Noise, which we have had the privilege to show here at Tufts. Her unwavering dedication continues to shine a light on the fight for justice and human rights. Please join me in welcoming Jewher Ilham to the stage.
Hello everyone, Salam alaikum. My name is Jewher Ilham. I am Uyghur. How many of you all have heard about the Uyghurs before 2019? Okay, good amount. Proud of you. For those of you who are not familiar with who the Uyghurs are, first of all, the Uyghurs are a Turkic ethnic group. We speak Uyghur. It's a Turkic language that is unrelated to Mandarin Chinese or Cantonese. We look different from the we look different from the Han Chinese people. We dress differently. We have a unique culture that's different from the Han Chinese population. And majority of the Uyghur population are Muslims. In fact, tonight will be the beginning of our holy month, Ramadan. Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak, everyone. Thank you. And the Uyghur people, we live in the Uyghur region, which is located to west of China. The Chinese government like to call the Uyghur region Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And Uyghurs in the diaspora like to call it, its historic name is Turkestan. You may not have heard much about the Uyghurs or have met an Uyghur person before meeting me, but I'm certain right here in this fair room, there are a number of products have been touched by the hands of Uyghurs working in forced labor conditions for multinational, international corporations. That doesn't sound really good, right? Whether it's the camera in this room, sorry, not targeting you, or the blouse over here, or the PVC wall panels right here, or parts of the cars that's parked right outside of this building that were purchased in the last 5 years. Researchers have linked over 17 industries, including beauty, food, information and technology industry, car and automotive industry, the mining industry, to Uyghur forced labor. To be frank, I am not here to make anyone feel bad about the Zara shirt or Shein dress that they put on this morning, or the wig that they're wearing, which most likely from the shaved heads of my Uyghur brothers and sisters who are locked up in a prison or in a camp, or the Tesla and Volkswagen car that you and your family are driving to work every day. What I'm here to say is that we can all work together. We can work together to push companies and governments to make changes. For decades, the Chinese government has been subjecting Uyghurs to repressive policies, pointing to several isolated instances of violence. The Chinese government labels all millions of Uyghurs as terrorists and religious extremists in order to justify its abuse of our basic fundamental human rights. But the key reasons for the oppression of Uyghurs lies in geopolitics. Did you know the Uyghur region is full of natural resources such as gold, gas, uranium, which marks up to over 20% of China's total energy reserves. The Uyghur region also produces over 84% of China's total cotton output, which is close to 25% of the global cotton output. 95% of the solar panels rely on one key material, solar-graded polysilicon. The Uyghur region produces the world's 35% of the polysilicon supply. The Uyghur region also produces over 10% of the aluminum, a key ingredient to manufacture cars, over 10% of the PVC panels, which you can make floorings and the walls, and close to 12% of lithium batteries, which we know it's a very popular ingredient for making the green energy EV cars, right? But over 10% of this lithium batteries are sourced and linked to Uyghur forced labor. The region is also critical to the success of the Belt and Road Initiative project, China's flagship project, which aims to link China with more than 100 countries around the world via shipping lanes, gas pipelines, and other railroads and other infrastructure projects. The Chinese government likes to frame the forced assimilation of Uyghurs as a stabilization of ethnic unrest and development in service for the Belt and Road Initiative. But the result is the oppression and locking up of millions. Researchers have found that over 1.8 million Uyghurs and members of other Turkic and Muslim majority peoples have been subject to arbitrary detention, either sent to re-education, prison, or forced labor. The Chinese government has also been transporting Uyghurs and other Muslim majority peoples into other parts of China, like in Shanghai, Beijing, Shandong, Guangzhou, where they are put to work in export-oriented factories under conditions that strongly indicate forced labor. Recent researchers indicates that coercive labor transfer programs have only expanded. It did not get any better, in particular to facilities outside of the Uyghur region. That means products products made even outside of the Uyghur region is not safe from being tainted from forced labor. At least 3.17 million people from the Uyghur region have been transferred outside of the Uyghur region through labor transfer programs, where they cannot go home, where they work under forced labor. It is important to understand that in the Uyghur region, the state-imposed forced labor intersects and reinforces with other types of egregious human rights violations, which includes a vast campaign of arbitrary detention, forced family separation, political indoctrination, gender-based sexual harassments, forced sterilization, and one of the most pervasive regimes of mass surveillance ever imposed, with the intention of erasing the Uyghur identity. The Chinese government's police state involves huge surveillance operations across the entire region with numerous checkpoints every few blocks on the streets. As you can see in the picture, every few blocks you will see police sitting at a desk requiring you to deposit your phone so they can download all your information and upload surveillance tools to your phones. My cousin, Noralia Yalkun, was stopped at one of those checkpoints in 2017. She was a nurse in her 20s. She was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for refusing to hand in her phone and for having a photo of my father in her cell phone. I'd like to share a little bit about my father, Ilham Tohti. My father, who is an economist professor at Beijing's Minzu University. He spent over 30 years there. He's an intelligent man, a man with a big heart. He speaks multiple languages. Though he was an economist by training, he was best known for his advocacy work on advocating for equal rights for the Uyghurs and for peaceful coexistence between the Uyghurs and Han Chinese. He spent years sharing his academic findings, his research, talking to journalists, reaching out to Chinese government officials in order to improve the Uyghurs' lives. But now, he's serving a life sentence. My father had never supported violence nor advocated for or campaigned for separatism, but his advocacy frequently angered the Chinese government. In 2014, my father was sentenced to life imprisonment. After he was detained, he was shackled, beaten, denied food twice, each time for 10 days. Just within the first couple of months of his detention, he lost more than 40 pounds. Family visits have been banned since 2017. Today, I don't know where my father is. I don't know if he has been transferred to another prison, another camp, or to a factory, or if he is alive. As a Uyghur, not knowing the whereabouts of our families, not being able to communicate with them, not being able to go home freely, having our rights taken away from us, have become a norm. People in this picture are businessmen, soccer players, comedians, singers, or students or faculty members just like you. But all of them have been sent to a re-education camp or forced labor. How did that happen? Here's a population data collection form that's circulated and passed around by Chinese authorities in the region, where the Chinese government uses to collect information such as how many times a person prays, whether they're passport holders, whether they have family members living overseas. Any of these data points can be used against you to subject you into imprisonment or be sent to eradication. At this point, no corporation in any sector should be sourcing anything from the Uyghur region. And in fact, we believe if a company wants to sell products in the Uyghur region, they'll have to prove that their products have no touch points of the Uyghurs because of the passage of Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in 2022. But it will only be sufficient, there will only be sufficient leverage if companies refrain from selling goods in other markets. They have to apply unified single global standard in all their markets. What's the point if they prevent selling Uyghur forced labor tainted goods in this country but start selling it in Canada or in Europe or in Indonesia? So what's also very important is that more countries follow suit and pass comparable legislations. As an Uyghur with multiple family members been impacted in this crisis, this issue is deeply personal to me. The organization that I work for, the Worker Rights Consortium, we're a member of the Coalition to End Uyghur Forced Labor, with the backing of more than 400 individuals and organizations, including Human Rights Foundation. We are calling on all corporations around the world to end all their complicity and all their links to Uyghur forced labor. As I mentioned earlier, the only way for a corporation to ensure that their products are not tainted by Uyghur forced labor is by exiting the Uyghur region completely at every level of their supply chain. I hope one day to see a world where Uyghur daughters and sons can go home freely without fearing for their lives. Yesterday, I woke up to the news of more than 40 Uyghur people have been deported from Thailand to China, where they're going to face severe persecution, torture, and possibly death, just for seeking freedom and for wanting to be an Uyghur without any ties and without any chains. I hope one day we Uyghurs can live without fearing for our lives. I hope Uyghurs, we can speak our mother tongue freely. I hope one day we as Uyghurs, we can practice our religion freely. I hope we as Uyghurs, we can practice our culture freely. And I hope one day I can call my father, my cousin, my grandparents freely without fearing of putting them in prison or ending their lives. And I hope that day comes soon. You can help make that happen. Do not underestimate your power. The truth is, we're all very powerful, and we all, everyone in this room, we share two things in common. First, we're all human beings. Second, guess what? We're all consumers. We all shop. That means we have leverage, and our voice matters. As consumers, we can push for changes. We can influence and impact corporations and governments to make changes. Please don't let go of this power. Together, I believe we will be able to make a change. We will be able to free my father, my family, and friends who have been trapped in this, what feels like an endless life of captivity. Thank you.
Fashion means so many different things for different people. Whether or not you're interested in fashion, all of us are wearing clothes. Fast fashion is not cheap. Someone else is paying the price.
One in 5 cotton garments in the apparel industry worldwide is linked to Uyghur forced labor. Right now, the Chinese Communist Party is committing genocide against the Uyghur people. The Uyghur people are native to northwestern China, known to the CCP as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Uyghurs are Muslim, have their own language, their own culture, and their own identity distinct from the Han Chinese. The CCP wants to erase the Uyghur identity. Since 2017, in a systematic effort to dehumanize and eventually eliminate the Uyghur population, the CCP has arbitrarily detained more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities. The CCP has forced the Uyghurs into concentration camps where they are regularly subjected to human rights abuses like inhumane treatment, sexual and gender-based violence, forced sterilization, mass surveillance, and torture. The Human Rights Foundation's Wear Your Values program raises awareness of the fashion industry's complicity in human rights abuses worldwide. Through innovative advocacy campaigns and educational exhibits, Wear Your Values aims to promote transparency in global supply chains and highlight the hidden social costs of the fashion industry. Discounted Lives is an installation that aims to raise awareness about Uyghur forced labor. The installation displays 2 racks of identical white t-shirts. One, made in China, priced at $4.99, and the other, made in a democracy, priced at $44.99. The receipts show the reasons behind the discounts, as well as portraits of Uyghurs detained in the camps. Discounted Lives urges consumers to think twice about their purchases and demands transparency from brands. To close out New York Fashion Week, HRF projected our Discounted Lives campaign on 3 iconic buildings in New York City: the Hyatt Tower, the New Museum, and the Brooklyn Bridge. Onlookers were urged to consider the human costs of their discounted t-shirts. The faces of arbitrarily detained Uyghurs stared back at them, serving as a reminder of the individuals forced to make the very clothes that they were wearing. What you save costs them everything.
We decided to host a fashion show here in the Oslo Freedom Forum. It's a beautiful way to use art and fashion to talk about a very important issue.
The Chinese government's repressive policies, those strategies that they implemented in the region, had to be enabled by the forced labor practices. Without forced labor, the Chinese government cannot continue such behavior.
I'm just a single person that on my own force I cannot release over 1 million people, but with everyone together, we may actually be able to push China to release millions of Uyghur people who have been having their rights taken away from them. Together, we make actions, and together we make changes.
It is not enough to live by your values. You must wear them too. Join us in keeping Uyghur forced labor out of your shopping cart. Download HRF's award-winning Uyghur forced labor checker.
Thank you for your powerful insights and for your dedication to the fight for Uyghur rights. Our final speaker is Félix Maradiaga, a Nicaraguan pro-democracy advocate, political activist, and former prisoner of conscience. A vocal critic of President Daniel Ortega, Félix made the courageous decision to run for president in 2021, only to be arrested and imprisoned in the infamous Chipote prison for nearly 2 years. In February 2023, he and 221 other political prisoners were released and sent to the United States, but his fight for Nicaraguan democracy continues. In 2024, Félix was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, underscoring his contributions to the global struggle for democracy and human rights. His dedication to freedom and justice remains unshaken. Please join me in welcoming Félix Maradiaga.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I apologize if I'm a bit emotional, but every time I hear the story of your father, Professor Tohti Jewher, I'm deeply touched because I've been in a similar situation, and my daughter and my wife were relentless advocates for my freedom, and I have the faith and hope that you will see your father again. Someone once said that there are countries that produce more history than what we can consume. And I actually come from one of those countries, Nicaragua. In 1979, there was a revolution in which a group of students, farmers, private citizens mobilized to overthrow a dictatorship. And there was, for a brief time, some hope, but the Sandinistas that presented themselves as freedom fighters actually became the same type of persecutors as of the previous regime. My mother made the most difficult decision a mother could make. After some of my relatives had been kidnapped, imprisoned, our property was confiscated, some of my close relatives became child soldiers. So at age 12, I started a journey from Nicaragua to Guatemala, then Mexico, spent time at a refugee center between Mexico and the United States, and I was welcomed into the United States with foster parents for 2 years. In 1990, we had the rebirth of hope. President Violeta Chamorro became the first democratically elected president in Nicaragua, and after 2 years in the United States, without my family, I went back to Nicaragua to complete high school, and then I went into college, of course, deeply touched by the experience of a country that was trying to rebuild itself. So I volunteered for my local church in a community to understand the tragedy of children that had lost their parents, the tragedy of mutilated soldiers from both the Contras that were backed by the Reagan administration, and the tragedy as well of the former Sandinista soldiers that had been completely forgotten by the administration. I completed college, and I took a break before going into graduate school and decided to accept an internship for 3 months. And that internship ended up turning into 10 years of a professional career. I didn't go into graduate school. After my internship, I became so committed to the work in these communities. And my first assignment was actually to go into the same communities I had been involved when I was a college student. But this time, I was a new civil servant, a professional that had been assigned with the responsibility of mapping the needs of former soldiers or former members of the Contra and their families. And upon going into those communities, I was only 20 years old at the time, I looked at hundreds and hundreds of teenagers without their limbs, former soldiers and civilians that were mutilated. And my curiosity and pain moved me to ask an expert on explosives why there were so many mutilated people. And what he told me struck me. He said, well, because there's something called anti-personal landmines. These are small explosive devices that are designed not necessarily to kill the soldier when he steps into this landmine that is hidden in the ground, but it has enough explosives to mutilate the person, because when an explosive blows and this person is mutilated, it requires other combatants to carry this person. And once the war is over, they continue to be in the ground, sometimes for decades, and the cost of rehabilitating this person is much higher than the cost of a casualty. And that's why we have that. However, 50% of the mutilated people are civilians. For example, a child that 15 years after the conflict is working as a shepherd and steps on this explosive device and loses his leg, and his life is completely destroyed when he's 8 years old, 10 years old. So that was my work for 10 years. We had something magnificent in 1997. Civil society around the world mobilized against something that the United Nations labeled inhumane weapons. If you ask me, I believe that all weapons used in civil wars should be inhumane. However, these type of weapons are designed precisely to create excessive pain and suffering. And this global civic movement from the grassroots eventually became the Ottawa Convention, approved in 1997, the first disarmament convention approved not by politicians, not an idea that came into the halls of a diplomatic mission, but a treaty that was the result of students like you that mobilized around the world to ban landmines. When I completed my tenure after 10 years in civil service as the head of disarmament and Secretary General of the Department of Defense, in charge with veteran affairs, I decided to start a career as an academic, trying to study authoritarian tactics around the world, trying to study the result of torture, trying to study the result of civil wars. And we just heard that 72% of the world lives in some sort of autocracy. However, you are seeing a map that was released today by Freedom House. So you're seeing this first notice. It's no longer 72%, it's 80% this year. For 19 consecutive years, the world has seen an erosion of democracy. Only 1 out of 5 people on earth lives in a free country. And 78 countries in the world have political prisoners and some type of arbitrary detention on prisoners of consciousness. That's more than 1 million people around the world. I was one of them. In 2018, many of my students and many other Nicaraguans went out to the streets to protest for the reforms that the Ortega regime had done. And I was placed in house arrest initially and then into a maximum security prison in conditions that I'm not yet prepared to describe. Extremely inhumane, deprivations of water and food for a long time. I never had access to a lawyer. My lawyer was also arrested, Roger Reyes, to the point that when he was released, he couldn't even remember the name of his daughters. That's how bad torture was. The 3 other lawyers that tried to defend me are now in exile. I was never allowed to see my wife. She was issued with an arrest warrant as well if she tried to go to Nicaragua and try to visit me. I didn't have any reading or writing materials, lost 60 pounds in only the first 4 months in political prison. However, my wife became a relentless advocate for my freedom. She mobilized people from around the world, including the Human Rights Foundation, for my freedom. And I knew that I was not alone. And that's the worst fear of a political prisoner. The worst fear is to be forgotten. And don't ever think that you cannot do something like that. I mean, the work that my wife did, not only for my freedom, but for the freedom of all political prisoners, made me to be here today and also to regain hope. However, when I was in prison, despite the fact that I didn't have any access to outside information, I knew one thing about the world. I knew that the Russians had conducted an illegal invasion of Ukraine. Guess what? My interrogators were trained in Russia, and they were bragged, and they had deep admiration of Putin. So the only news I had is these interrogators bragging about the invasion of Ukraine. So when I was released from prison, the first thing I did is that I went to Ukraine. And I talked to soldiers and to children that had been kidnapped in Ukraine and sent into Russia to forget their Ukrainian culture and language and identity and to be forced into becoming Russians. And when I heard the testimonies of these kidnapped children, it was a testimony that I felt when I was 12 years old living in a refugee camp. When I heard the testimonies of these soldiers, it was very similar to the soldiers that I had interviewed in my first job in 1997. When I heard the testimonies of people that had suffered arbitrary detention in Russia, they were the same testimonies that I had suffered myself. And I realized that the new political weapon is political prison. It creates the same tactical and strategic effect of an anti-personal landmine. Remember that I started this telling you about my story with anti-personal landmines, designed not to kill necessarily, but to inflicting excessive pain. And that's what arbitrary detention for political prison does. Basically, when a human rights defender, when an academic, when a journalist, when a religious authority, when a private citizen is arrested for political reasons, the movement, the church, if it's a religious persecution case, a journalist, They all have to stop talking about the issues that we care. The entire family has to focus on how to release that prisoner. If a political leader is arrested, the political party in opposition can no longer speak about public issues or public policy because the entire political party has to focus on how to release their prisoners. So the new inhumane political weapon of the world is actually political detention, arbitrary detention for political reasons. And that's why, with the help of my wife, we launched the End Arbitrary Detention Global Campaign that is hosted right now at the University of Virginia. And what we're trying to do is, first of all, to understand what are the mechanisms to support family members of political prisoners. My wife co-wrote a book, the Handbook on the Liberation of Political Prisoners, which has been published by the World Liberty Congress. So I invite you to please go to our website, worldlibertycongress.org, and you can download the book. But we also realize that the world doesn't have a consensus or a definition on what is a political prisoner. A political prisoner is not a politician in prison. In some parts of the world, that's actually good news. Arbitrary detention for political reasons is what we mean about that. And we're trying to have the opportunity that I just had just about 2 years ago, after 4 years of not seeing my daughter, because if I include the time in house arrest plus the time in prison, I didn't see my daughter for many years. And when I was released, thanks to the relentless effort of my wife, I was able to hug my daughter Alejandra again. And I hope that the daughters and the sons of other political prisoners can see their children again. But they can only do that with your support. If you join a global movement that could replicate the Ottawa Convention and create an international treaty that tackles this global political inhumane weapon or arbitrary detention for political reasons. Please join the movement and allow other children, wives, and friends of political prisoners to have the opportunity to be alive and to be here as well. I'll share with you part of that experience. Thank you for listening.
Contame, ¿cómo se siente estar esperando a tu papá después de 4 años de no verlo? Bueno, 3 años de no verlo.
No aguanto mi corazón.
¿Cómo? No te escucho.
No aguanto mi corazón porque...
Así, estás muy emocionada. ¿Y qué es lo primero que le vas a decir a tu papá?
Que lo adoro.
Ay. Ahí está, mira Alejandra Victoria. Ahí está en ese carro. Con cuidado.
Esa belleza.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Felix and to all of our speakers who have shared their stories with us this morning. Arbitrary detention is one of the worst experiences that activists in our community can go through, and one of the most pressing challenges that we have in the struggle for democracy today. So thank you so much for sharing this, for sharing the video. And I had the pleasure of working with Felix's wife years ago when he was still arbitrarily detained. So it's quite surreal to be back here today talking with all of you and with Felix. With that, I'm going to give everyone a few moments to decompress. We'll take just a brief break, 5 to 10 minutes. Please, there's some coffee and water in the back of the room. Feel free to stand up, stretch your legs, get a drink, and we'll meet back here in just 10 minutes. Thank you so much.